My name is Kugane and today we're going to be covering how to sideboard in Flesh and Blood. So for you newer players out there, you probably are struggling, you don't know what to do. You know that in the CC format you need to sideboard, you don't know what to take out, you don't know what to put in. I know it's stressful, but I'm here to help you out. But before we get into that, this channel is sponsored by Patreon. My kind patrons send me a small amount of money every single month to help me to keep on producing content on this channel. So if at the end of this video you feel this content was useful to you, please consider subscribing to my Patreon so that I can continue creating Flesh and Blood and TCG content. So when it comes to sideboarding, one of the big questions that I get from patrons and people that I coach is, how do I do it? What do I take out of the deck? Because usually when you look up a deck list on a place like FABTCG.com or even on February or FabDB, most people, they don't add a sideboard guide. Well, the thing that I personally do, and that has worked really well for me, it has been working well for me for at least a year now, that instead of having like a 60 card main deck like a lot of people do, is instead I have like either a 54 or a 57 card main deck. And then the other cards, I just add 3 to 6 cards into the deck depending on the matchup. This gives me a lot of like mental space during big events that I don't need to think too much like, what should I take out? Should this go out? Should that go out? Etc. And instead I can just have like a very nice, easy to understand sideboarding guide that I can just be like, okay, I'm up against a illusionist. That means that I need to bring some 6 attacks to pop the Phantasms. So I just put in my Command and Conquers into the deck, shuffle up, present the deck, and I'm done. No thinking, no stressing, nothing. So my number one rule or my number one tip is keep your main board or your main deck a 54 to 57 card deck and just add a couple of cards into that. Like, it's not like Magic the Gathering where you need to swap cards out with your sideboard. Well, it could be if you wanted it to be, but in Flesh and Blood, keep it simple. It makes it a lot easier for you and it makes it a lot less hard for you to figure out what to put into the deck when you're actually sideboarding, and also makes it easier for you to optimize the deck to be able to know what to cut out until you reach that optimal build of around 54 to 57 cards. So for my top 5 picks that I like to put into my sideboard guides at the moment, I have a list of cards that I tend to pull from depending how the meta shifts. In this top 5 today, like, these top 5 cards are cards that I think are evergreen and always going to be valuable for the sideboard in general. They may not reflect the current metagame, so you do need to take a little bit of time to look at the metagame, look at which decks you're seeing a lot of right now, and then you just pick cards from this list accordingly to put into your sideboard to then be able to put into your deck when you're up against those heroes. So my number 5 pick is Oasis Respite. Oasis Respite is very useful because it can stop any source of damage. This is useful against decks that like to combo off like Wizard, especially the combo aggro wizards like Kano, because they like to do a bunch of damage to get an effect, and if you have a couple of Oasis Respites in your deck, you can very easily stop the full combo by casting an Oasis on, for example, the Aether Wildfire, pitching a blue in order to pay for a couple of Arcane with your Arcane Barrier, and then it becomes much harder for them to be able to combo off and to just OTK you on the spot on that very turn. Because of that, I feel Oasis Respite is definitely a good card, and even though that right now it doesn't see much play, if we end up in a metagame where Wizard gains more popularity, and I do mean those really combo aggro wizards, so not wizards like Icelander, then having Oasis Respite in your sideboard is just very useful. For now though, I would advise that you don't really need them. You can probably focus on different cards to put in, but if we do end up in that meta, keep it in mind Oasis Respite is a great tool against the wizards out there. So my number 4 pick are actually a bunch of cards, which are Erase Face, Command and Conquer, but also some budget picks like Rally the Rearguard or the Fyandel's Fighting Spirit. All of these are very solid 6 attacks. Erase Phase and Command and Conquer, of course, being the Majestics here, which have a very good on-hit effect. Erase Phase taking away all the keywords from cards, while Command and Conquer can pretty much destroy an arsenal and stop defense reactions in general. So why do you need 6 attacks? For the most part, and this is really for the most part, in the current metagame you need 6 attacks to be able to combat stuff like Illusionist. Why, you might ask? Because Illusionist has a keyword on a lot of the big attacks, which is called Phantasm. What Phantasm does is that when their attack gets blocked by an attack that has 6 or more power, then that attack pretty much gets destroyed on the spot. It's the simplest way to explain it. They lose their go again, they lose the action point, and then you can pretty much go over to your turn and start doing your stuff. So with just a single card, even if they come in with a ridiculous amount, like let's say they come in with a giant attack of 14 damage, if you put your 6 attack in front of that, it just pops, it's gone, and that's the end of the turn. Therefore, having a bunch of 6 attacks in your sideboard when there's a lot of Illusionists in the format is just very important to be able to keep the tempo to yourself, to be able to preserve enough cards in your hand to be able to attack them back with those and during your turn. So therefore, Erase Phase and Command and Conquer, kind of a shared slot. Usually in the sideboard you only have space for like 3 to maximum 6 of these. In the best case scenario, like the best picks would be Erase Phase and Command and Conquer, but if you're on a budget, using stuff like Fiendel Fighting Spirit or Rally the Rearguard, or even something like Nourishing Emptiness is a completely fine budget pick. For the most part, you will be using these cards to block anyways. Like, just put into your deck what you have and you should be more than fine. My number 3 pick is actually a pick that is kind of meta relevant right now, and that is Energy Potion. So Energy Potion is a blue item. It doesn't have a block value, which is one of the reasons why normally it doesn't see as much play. But when you put one of these onto the board, you can pop these at instant speed at any time to generate 2 resources. Right now we have a deck called Icelander that is quite popular in the current metagame, and that deck revolves around something called a Frostbite and various effect that makes you discard if you don't pay a certain resource cost. By running Energy Potions, you can kind of set yourself up in a safe situation where if they do try to tax you with a discard effect, or they do try to tax you with something like a Frostbite, you can very easily just crack the Energy Potion in response to that trigger. Then you will have 2 resources floating, and with those two resources you can then pay for the Frostbite, you can pay for a discard effect and stuff like that, and you can continue going on doing your turn as you normally would. Therefore, I do think Energy Potion is quite important, especially for the go white combo decks out there, because without something like this, you can kind of get caught off guard if they have the right cards at the right time. I've seen it a lot, like 5 players that finally have all the combo pieces together, they go all in, they play the Art of War, they play the Belittles, which are banned as of next week, by the way, the Belittles, but previously we had access to them, and then all of that just gets completely ruined because Icelander out of nowhere just plays something like a Blizzard onto the Belittle while the trigger was still on the stack, so they couldn't fetch the Minnowism yet, they don't have a blue in hand, and then they're just in trouble because they need to pretty much get rid of 2 cards in the hand to be able to pay for the cost of the Blizzard. It's just absolutely brutal, and therefore it's very important to have Energy Potions in your sideboard, and I think going forward having Energy Potions in general is just very important. My number 2 pick is actually something that is targeted at the Go White decks, and that is This Rounds on Me. So This Rounds on Me is a 1-cost card that lets both you and your opponent draw a card, and you might think that's a bit of a bad effect, like why would I want them to draw a card like that? That's not good. But hear me out. So This Rounds on Me, both you and your opponent draw a card, but then during your opponent's next turn, all their attacks deal -1 damage. So if you're up against a Go White deck like Fi, like Dash, that likes to spit out like 3, 4, 5 or even more attacks in a single turn, giving them that extra card can actually mitigate you damage in the long run, because the first 3 attacks, they are pretty much dealing -1 damage. So the 4th attack they play, let's say that's the card that they just drew, it's not going to outvalue all the minus reduction on the rest of the combat chain. Because of that, it's kind of valuable to have the disrounds on me in general, because if they have, for example, like a 7-card combat chain after you play this thing that is -7 damage, you gave them a card, you can kind of think like the card you gave them is like a +3 damage, and you still have like a net value of 4 damage that you didn't take that otherwise you would take, on top of the fact that a lot of their 4 attacks become a lot easier to block with a single card, so you are mitigating a lot of those on-hit effects as well. So things like Salt to Wound don't become as powerful as they normally would be, and therefore you are reducing the total damage you're taking even further. Even if they are doing a big combo turn with an Art of War, it becomes a lot easier to mitigate everything and to be able to block stuff out. Therefore, this rounds on me, it's a very pricey staple right now, but for a very good reason, because it just generates so much defensive value to you that I can really suggest pick one of these up, especially now with the reprints coming out of History Pack 2. These are probably going to be dropping in price quite a bit. You should get yourself a playset of these, because you're going to be needed for a very long time with all these Go White aggro decks in the format. So the last card that I have for you all today is actually my personal favorite sideboard tech. It goes in pretty much every deck, every format, and that is Sink Below, and to a lesser extent Fate Foreseen, even though Fate Foreseen I don't really play all that much anymore. But Sink Below is such a valuable card. Not only does it block for 4, but it also lets you fix a card in your hand, and it's a defense reaction, which means that you can very easily play it from your arsenal. If you're up against a hero that has a lot of on-hit effects, your opponent plays a Snatch for 4, you just Sink Below it, they don't get the card draw. Your opponent plays a Crush effect from one of their Guardian cards, you block for 3 from hand, you play a Sink Below from the arsenal, and the Crush effect doesn't go off. You fully block an attack, but you're not sure if they have a pummel. No problem, Sink Below has your back. If they do play that pummel, you just Sink Below on top of it and you don't get the discard effect. The card is just so flexible, so good, such a high defense value on top of it, and just being able to fix your hand and dig deeper into your deck is just extremely powerful. Drawing cards in Flesh and Blood is powerful because it lets you get to your combo pieces faster, and being able to preserve your life total, especially in the early game with a card like this, is just extremely valuable. So Sink Below is probably the #1 staple. It might even be the best card in Flesh and Blood. Maybe a very hot take, but I think Sink Below is very good. It can screw you over sometimes if you play something like a combo deck like Fi, where you draw into them after you play Art of War, but for the most part, like decks that like to play hands with like 2 or 3 cards, Sink Below is just such a solid card, and you should definitely pick up a couple of these if you don't have them yet. So for you really budget players out there and you want to have a decent sideboard on a very low budget, I would suggest get yourself 3 copies of Sink Below. Those are a must-have. You can even bring them instead of this rounds on me, because they mitigate a similar amount of damage. You should get yourself 3 copies of Energy Potion, so that's already 6 slots of your sideboard accounted for. And then when it comes to the 6 attacks for stuff like Illusionist, I would say get yourself a playset of Fyendel's Fighting Spirit, and maybe get yourself a playset of Rally the Rearguard, and that should be plenty in terms of 6 attacks to be able to have a proper defense against those illusionists out there. Anyways, that's all from me for today. Again, if this video was useful to you, let me know by leaving a comment down below, liking the video and hitting that subscribe button on the way down. And if you want to support me, you can do so on patreon.com/Kugane Gaming. If you need coaching, I also offer coaching sessions on that same service. And if you need a playmat, I do sell some very nice playmats on my website, www.kuganegaming.com. And yeah, thank you for watching, and I will see you all very soon with another Flesh and Blood video. Take care.